So what I'm going to do today, it's very different from talks I usually give, but I'm giving this talk partially out of a little bit of frustration with the way people talk about issues on campus. And I'm going to go with, kind of like Alexander Brodsky did, I'm going to go with some of the common sort of, what I refer to sort of simple arguments about what's going on campus. And I'm trying to make the point overall that it's generally more complex than that. So simple theory one, is this just political correctness run amok? A term, I don't particularly love the term political correctness. I feel like I'm forced to use it because we don't have vocabulary for it yet. But here's my thing that I've been on lately, and particularly due to cases like this. And we have a lot of cases like this, but none probably quite as horrifying as this. Is anyone familiar with what recently happened at University of Northern Michigan? This is a case where if you went to report that you were raped or that you were having a bad bout of depression or anxiety, and you went to the counseling services at University of Northern Michigan, and this happened to many students, you would receive a threatening-sounding letter saying, don't tell your friends you're considering self-harm. Don't tell your friends you're considering, and this even happened when people didn't mention anything about self-harm or suicide. This to me is an absolutely insane idea. If anybody knows anything about depression, knows anybody about people at suicidal stages, the idea of telling someone, first of all, isolate yourself, and second of all, you're a burden on your friends, is about the craziest thing you could actually imagine doing. So whose narrative exactly does this fit? Does this fit? Is this liberal? Is this conservative? How can the culture war make sense of it? Well, frankly, in the oversimplified narrative of the culture war, you kind of can't. But I do think there is an answer to where this comes from. But it's interesting. Oh, so yeah, this is one of the things, this is some of the writings from the University of the Dean. It's just, it just is so heartless. But so how do you also explain this? University of Hawaii at Hilo. They told students that they couldn't hand out copies of the Constitution or protest the NSA outside of this little tiny free speech swamp on campus that they had to ask 2 weeks in advance permission in order to use, and they were told, you can't protest the NSA outside of the free speech zone in advance permission. It's not the 60s anymore. But okay, maybe the Constitution, maybe that fits sort of a culture war narrative, but hold on, wait. California State Polytechnic University, this is a guy who's protesting cruelty to animals. And he's not only told that he has to go to a tiny little free speech zone, that he has to ask the state for advance permission. These are both state schools, First Amendment applies, this is not constitutional. And that not only does he have to do all these things, he has to wear a badge that explains he's been granted permission by the university in order to engage in his free speech activities. So what narrative does this fit? This actually fits this other simple theory. Now, I of course have to swallow some pride in referring to this as a simple theory because this is a theory that I offer primarily as the main reason for a lot of the crazy things we see on campus in my book Unlearning Liberty, my first book in 2012. But I think even that is oversimple. But I do think there is a lot of truth in the idea that as we've seen an expansion of the administrative class at universities, that you end up in a situation where universities are over-regulating. They're regulating aspects of students' lives that were once considered to be off limits. But that narrative doesn't even entirely explain everything. So do people know about the Laura Kipnis case? This is a case of a feminist professor. She writes for the Chronicle of Higher Education. She's a second-wave feminist, self-described. And she wrote about how, in her opinion, Title IX is actually certain dramatic interpretations of Title IX are infantilizing to women. They actually think she thinks they're disempowering. She mentioned a lawsuit at her school. She thought that was that. She was happy it was a little bit of a controversial article. And then next thing you know, she was being investigated for under Title IX for writing an article criticizing the overreach of Title IX. Yeah. She was not allowed to know who her accusers were at first. She didn't know what the actual charges was, what they stem from. And what actually ended up resolving this case is she took it public, once again through the Chronicle of Higher Education, to explain this is amazing. This actually is worthy of the term Kafkaesque. I'm not allowed to know who I'm being charged by. But once she took it public, shockingly, not shockingly, Northwestern suddenly dropped the case within something like 24 hours of her taking it public. And this is part of the twist. This is part of one of the things where it's not just administrators. It's not that administrators are imagining phantoms. And I do try to explain time and time again, a lot of the wackier cases you see on campus come from situations in which it's not everyone's wildly politically correct, it's that they actually are being incentivized to overreact. And that's partially because, as Janet Halley mentioned in the previous presentation, the Department of Education has come up with a definition of harassment that is just way too broad. And way too pliable. If I could get this actual blueprint definition of harassment in court, it will be, and I guarantee you, it will be laughed out of court because it is so inconsistent with existing First Amendment law. When we actually have a case at Louisiana State University where a female professor was fired citing the blueprint. So we'll get to see what happens in court. I'm willing to take bets.